This video is going to be all about recording gameplay. I'm going to show you the method that I use to record my gameplay, and as far as I know this is actually the best way to record gameplay for anyone with any setup effectively, on PC that is anyway. I'm only going to talk about the actual recording process in this video. When it comes to editing and things like that, I'm going to do other videos for those. As that's actually going to be different for different people, you may actually want to find a different way to edit your video than what I do. Video editing software is very expensive and can be quite hard to get hold of. I use Sony Vegas. I know a lot of people use Adobe, but yeah, I'll do a separate video on that. This one is going to be just purely about the actual recording process. Probably the first thing that needs to be discussed is the fact that when it comes to recording, you really want to record on a separate hard drive to the one that you have Windows and your games on. And indeed, I do have two hard drives in my computer, one for Windows and games and another one for recording to and for backup as well, actually. Not too much backup stuff though. I'm trying to keep the space as free as possible for recordings. I've actually got an external hard drive that I use for more permanent long-term storage. The drive that you record onto does need to have quite a high speed, so you don't want it to be an external USB drive or anything like that. You want it to be an internal drive connected through the SATA port. SATA if you're American, or SATA if you're Australian, but yeah, SATA if you're English. Now the speed of the drive you need to record to doesn't have to be crazy fast, although if you're going to be recording in 1440 at 60 frames a second, maybe a standard 7500 RPM hard drive's not going to be quite enough. I don't know, it could be. It's borderline. It depends the sort of bit rate that you're going to be recording in. Currently I have Windows and games on an M2 drive, and I record to an SSD. Now recording to an SSD is probably totally overkill. In my old rig, which when I was recording 1080p at 60 frames a second, I had two 7,500 RPM drives in RAID 0, which is where RAID 0 configuration is where the drives actually run faster when you've got two drives put together, rather than the other possible RAID configurations which are for security. That setup, I'm sure, would have been totally fine for 1440 at 60 frames a second. Of course, I'm all about, you know, still trying to keep the frame rate as high as possible while actually recording at high quality. But for the majority of people, recording on a 7,500 RPM hard disk drive is probably going to be fine. Certainly getting two of those and putting it in RAID, you probably wouldn't need more than that. SSD is totally unnecessary. But anyway, onto the software. The software that you want to use is OBS. To the best of my knowledge, this is the best recording software. May seem a little bit complicated at first if you're not used to using it, but it's not too bad really. And of course, it's totally free and open source. Right here you can see my screen. This is with the OBS window. It's set up to my specifications, but when you first install it, there's probably going to be nothing in your sources section here, and there's probably going to be nothing in your scenes section here. You want at least one scene in there, so if you've got nothing, no scenes in the scenes section, click on the plus here. Add a scene. There's no options for the scene, it's just you giving it a name. Call it scene 1 or whatever, or simply scene as I have. Then you want to set your sources. To add a source, you click onto the little plus here, and here's all the different types of recording sources that you can choose. Now the ones you're probably going to be interested in are Game Capture, like me, which is the one that I use, Game Capture. That's for recording all full screen applications. The other one you may want to consider is Display Capture. The scenarios in which you would use Display Capture are if you're recording your desktop, like I am now. I've actually got a second OBS running on my second screen. I'm not going to show you that because it just like potentially confuse matters. Just try and keep things as simple as I can here. So yeah, if you want to record your desktop, or if you want to record, say, browser games or something like that, you want to use the Display Capture, but personally I'm using the Game Capture. The only time I'm recording gameplay, it's always full screen, always running full screen. But I know a lot of people do run in windowed mode. If you're running games in windowed mode that you want to record, you're probably going to need to set your source to Display Capture rather than Game Capture. Now you can actually adjust the settings of the Game Capture or Desktop Capture by clicking on the cog icon here. If you hold the mouse pointer over it, it says Properties. Anyway, you click on that. I do actually capture my cursor, so I've ticked Record Cursor, and I've also ticked Use Anti-Cheat Compatibility Hook. And you'd want to use that because some games would actually detect the recording software as potential cheat software, so you've got to put the tick on there so that it knows that you're actually running some recording software. Alright, so once you've got that set up, the first thing you want to do is go to Settings. On the General tab here, obviously you want to make sure you've got the right language. There are different themes that you can choose. I'm currently using the dark theme. Dark theme I just find is a little bit easier on the eyes. It's a little bit more of a game style HUD, but it really doesn't matter too much. Just down to personal preference there. These are all default settings. If you have a look, set it to the same settings as what I've got if they're any different, and that should be fine. But we're going to move on now to the output settings. But make sure your output mode is on advanced. You've got a few tabs here. This one I'm currently on the streaming tab. Ignore that, I don't actually do any streaming yet, so I've not set that up at all. This video is all about recording, not streaming, so we're going to talk about recording. Click on the recording tab, and the first thing you want to set is your record path. This is where the recordings are going to be saved to. And as I said earlier, you want to make sure that's a different drive to the one that you've actually got Windows and your games on. The recording format, MP4 is the most advisable format to use. Some of the other ones are pretty good. MKV is another popular one, but I recommend MP4. MP4 is the best one to work with the editing software that I use, so I choose MP4. You want to tick the number of audio tracks that you're actually using. In my case, that's 2. One for the game sound and one for my microphone. But I know that other people may have, say, the recording of their friends' voices on like a 3rd or 4th channel, and in those instances you would want to record even more audio tracks. But like I say, I'm using just the game sound and my microphone on a separate sound channel, so I've got ticked for audio, just audio track 1 and 2. Now when it comes to the encoder, I'm using the NVIDIA NVENC-H264 codec. Obviously this codec only works with NVIDIA graphics cards, although I do know that AMD graphics cards are quite popular at the moment, perhaps more popular than they used to be. And if you had an AMD graphics card, you'd want to use the straight X264 codec. But in my case, I'm using the NVIDIA. If you were rescaling your recordings to a separate resolution to the one that you're playing at, say you were playing at 2K, but you actually only wanted your recordings to be 1080p, then you'd want to click on the rescale output bit here, and then there you would set the resolution that you want the actual recordings to be recorded at. I'm playing at and recording at 2K, which is 1440. So I do not actually have that ticked. I do recommend recording at the resolution you're playing at if you possibly can, but I understand that sometimes you might be limited by your hardware or something like that, so you might not be able to. Now down here at the bottom we got the rate control options. For rate control I actually use CQP. The reason I use CQP is because that is the better option for recording at very high quality. The option that most people would actually want to use is probably VBR, variable bitrate. I'm using a constant bitrate. When you use the CQP rate control, there are a few options you can choose. The first one being the CQ level, and this number here represents the quality. The lower the number is, the higher the quality. Now for most people, the CQP could probably be like 25, maybe go to 20. Anything lower than 20, you don't get such a huge improvement in video quality, although you do get a massive increase in in file size. So you've kind of got to get the balance between the quality that you want and the file size that you want, but you've got to remember that when you upload to YouTube shows only extremely compressed video, okay, so it's fairly low quality really, although when you actually upload the video, YouTube will reprocess the video into a format that YouTube wants to use. And that format is very low quality, and a lot of people say there's no point in actually recording anything above that kind of quality, but me personally, I actually like to record an extremely high quality video and upload an extremely high quality video under the logic that the better the quality of the video is when YouTube re-encodes it, the better it will look afterwards. Now that's quite a debatable subject, and I'm certainly no expert in this field, so if anyone wants to like add to that, bring in any comments or anything, let me know what the deal is, then please do. The CQ level, once you get below sort of like 20, you get into almost lossless quality, which is just basically means absolutely pointlessly high. Definitely if you go below 14, then that's kind of ridiculous. Perhaps even 16 is ridiculous. Maybe 18, sort of 18, 20 is probably what most people would say there's no point in going over, but I'm recording in 1440 at 60 frames a second, so I've put it up to 16. If I was recording at say 1080, 60 frames a second, I would have 18 there instead of 16. The keyframe interval, just leave that to 0. The preset, again, going for the highest quality possible, so I've put it on max quality. Profile, again, I put it on high because that's the highest quality option there. Look ahead, psychovisual tuning, you can leave those unticked. GPU set to 0 and max B-frames, put that on 2. Those are the as I say, those are the settings that I use. However, this creates massive files. As I've said, the files are absolutely huge. So yeah, for example, I'm looking at my hard drive now and I've got one 44-minute video and that takes up just under 94 gigabytes. So, you know, on a 1 terabyte drive you could only fit 10 videos like that before your whole hard drive's full. So if that's a bit excessive, another option that you might want to choose, the one that I would actually recommend for most people, would be instead of CQP to actually use VBR, variable bitrate. I have done some recording with the variable bitrate, and I do at some point intend to experiment to see whether the VBR or the CQP settings, you know, see if it really makes any difference when you upload the video on YouTube. Still, you can get very high quality video using these settings that I'm showing you here. And the file size will be probably 1/3 of what it would be using the CQP settings that I just showed you. But anyway, like I say, I've had very high quality video in the past using these settings with the variable bitrate, and basically it changes the bitrate as it's recording. As there's more detail, it will increase the bitrate, and as the detail lowers a bit, it will reduce the frame rate. So say like in Arma 3, for example, if you're in third-person view driving down the road at high speed, that's a lot of detail. The bitrate is going to go up for that bit. But if you're like in a building, repacking your mags, just staring at a wall, not moving around, the bitrate's not going to be very high at that point. And by doing this, it allows you to still have very high quality video, but with pretty large reduction in file size. So, you know, if you're a bit limited on your frame rate, bit limited on your hard drive speed, bit limited on your hardware overall, you'd probably want to go for the VBR option. Or if you just don't have the hard drive space either, you'd probably want to go for the VBR option. The other good thing with VBR as opposed to CQP is that with CQP, if I've got, say, if I say edited that 44-minute video and then I'm cutting sections of it out, when the video goes from one section to another in the editor, I'm getting little lags, you know, 1/2 second lags between like frame transitions. So when I've cut the video and it goes from one clip to the next, in the editing software I can't actually see what the transition looks like properly. I have to like pre-render the little section where it goes from one clip to another to see what it actually looks like. Although in a lot of my videos I'll actually take the 44-minute recording, render the sections that I want, and then edit the rendered sections, and when I do that, yeah, it will actually it'll work fine in the editing software. But if I was using VBR to make that 44-minute video, then I would not have that problem. I could just put that 44-minute video in, start cutting it up, and then when I'm looking at it in the editing software, it's going to transition between clips totally fine. And so yeah, even on my rig, which is pretty heavy duty, working directly with those CQP files can be a bit of a nightmare, which is another reason why you might want to choose the VBR, variable bitrate. If you do choose variable bitrate, these are probably the sort of settings you want to look at. Maybe a bit lower. You could probably go down to say 25,000 and 40,000 as opposed to 40,000 and 60,000. But probably wouldn't go too much lower than that, depending on the sort of quality and the sort of resolution you're recording at. Obviously, if you're recording in a lower resolution at 30 frames, you can probably go a bit lower. But the thing is, you're really going to need to experiment to see what looks best. And it does also depend a little bit on the games you play and how the games look and what the graphics are like in the games. So for me personally, I like to turn down a lot of post-processing effects. And that means that when the videos upload on YouTube, they can look very blocky and pixelated because there's a lot of like very fine, jagged detail that's on the screen. So turning the quality right up in the recordings can help to like bring back a bit of the quality when it uploads onto YouTube. But you know, if you've got your AA turned up, you've got like depth of field and all those kind of blurring effects, radial blur, motion blur, and all that switched on in the game, then you can get away with actually running a lot lower bitrate and still have the game look pretty good on YouTube. But when playing first-person shooters competitively, you generally want to switch off all the AA and post-processing because it creates input lag, which is not good for training your mouse muscle memory. But yeah, anyway, I'd recommend don't use any higher than this. Try this, or maybe a little bit lower if this is pushing it for you. Minimum bitrate 40,000, maximum bitrate 60,000. Keyframe interval again leave to 0. Preset max quality, profile high, again to keep the quality as high as possible. No need for look ahead, no need for visual tuning, psycho visual tuning. GPU keep to 0 and max B frames set to 2. If you're using an AMD graphics card, you're going to have to set the encoder to the X264. Now if you're doing that, I'd recommend putting your rate control on CBR, constant bitrate. You want to set your bitrate level to, say, 30,000 is pretty good. I've got here 42,500. That's an intermediate for what I'd consider to be crazy high settings. For the best quality sort of crazy high settings probably go for like 60,000. There's probably no point in going beyond that. Use custom buffer size, don't click on that. Keyframe interval again set to 0. CPU usage. Using this encoder does use the CPU more than your graphics card, so the better quality you use, the more it's going to affect your frame rate in game, especially in a game like Arma 3, which is very, very much dependent on the CPU for the frame rate. Very fast is the default. I'd probably put it onto something more like fast, and then very slow and placebo. You're just going to slow your CPU right down unnecessarily. Fast, maybe medium. I've not actually experimented with these settings myself as I don't have an AMD card. This is just settings I'm going on from doing a bit of research, so if anyone knows any better information on this, chime in, leave some comments, let us know. There's probably no point in slowing your CPU down by going any further than fast. Just fast, fast or very fast. Probably the options you want to be looking at, and experiment and see which one works best for you on your system. And just leave the profile to none, the tune to none, and don't put anything in the options either. And that should be good for you AMD users. Now onto the audio tab. You can see here you can set the bitrate for each of the audio channels you're using. Default's 160, but I've set the actual channels that I'm using to 320. Other than that, there's nothing really to put there. Right, some of the other settings you're going to want to look at are on the left here. You want to go to video, and here you're going to want to set your base resolution. That's the resolution you're actually playing the games at. And you've got under that you've got the option to output at a different resolution to the one that you're recording at. You do not want to set that to anything higher than what you're recording at. You want to set it to the same ideally, or lower if you're having issues with your hardware not being up to scratch, recording's affecting the frame rate too much, then maybe you'd want to scale down the resolution of your actual recordings, although I'm not actually doing that. And try not to do that if you can help it. Try to record at the same resolution you're playing at if you can. Now if you do rescale your output at all, then you've got to make sure that the downscale filter is selected. The one that you want to choose is the Lanczos. That is the best downscale filter as far as I'm aware. Now, although I've set Lanczos, I'm actually not rescaling my recording, so it doesn't actually make use of that at all whatsoever. But I've put it there anyway, just in case I ever do and then forget to set the Lanczos thing. And of course, under that you can set your frame rate. I'm using 60. 60 is the advisable frame rate for gameplay in my opinion, but that's all you need for that bit. Alright, now let's check out the audio. You want your sample rate to be set to something good. I'm actually only recording with the sample rate of 48 kilohertz, as the option is only 44 or 48, so I've chose 48. Stereo, because I'm just playing in stereo, and this bit's important where you set your global audio devices. Desktop audio, as I say, I'm recording my desktop audio and my microphone audio, so desktop audio is actually set to the device that's actually outputting the sound of a game when I play the game, and that is my Sound Blaster Z sound card. The SPDIF out is the digital out. I do not actually use the digital out, I'm using the analog out, which is the speakers Sound Blaster Z, even though I actually have headphones, it does say speakers there. You have an option for a second desktop audio. I'm not using a second desktop audio. Then underneath that is your microphones. I'm only using one microphone, so I've set in the first microphone the microphone that I use to record my voice, which is actually a USB microphone. So I'm plugging it into my computer for a USB port. I'm not plugging it in directly into Sound Blaster. So for me, microphone, USB advanced audio device. Other than that, the options for audio are pretty much default there. So let's go and have a look at the last couple of things I need to show you. I've actually turned off the preview window there. When I'm recording, I do have OBS open on a second screen, and I can actually monitor what's going on the OBS window here, although I only actually monitor the audio levels. I do not monitor the video. The last thing you would want to consider is in your audio levels here, you might want to actually add some filters. You see the little cog next to the channel there, so that's the options for the microphone channel, and that one there is the options for the desktop audio. I've not actually done any filters for the desktop audio, I've only done filters for the mic. I'll show you what filters I've got. It's only just one filter. In fact, I've put on a noise gate. What a noise gate does, and the reason I use the noise gate, is noise gate basically turns off your mic unless there's a sound of a certain volume. My recordings will not pick up the, like, if there's birds tweeting outside my window or anything, there's quite a noise, so I won't pick that up. But will pick my voice up, which is, I'm talking quite close to the microphone. Obviously, you've got to mess around with the settings to get it exactly where you want it, so that it's picking up your voice and not your background audio. And you're going to have to, set that for what works best for you, for your audio environment and your hardware. And you've got a closed threshold and an open threshold, so that's basically like what the noise level has to be for it to switch on and what the noise level has to be for it to switch off. So obviously once it gets that high, it starts recording. Once it gets that low, switches off the recording. I believe the attack time, hold time, and release time I've just set as left as default. When you're talking about filters on your audio, probably don't use very much processing power at all whatsoever. It might do if you've got many filters on there, but I've just got this one noise gate and this seems to work fine for me. I actually use a program called Audacity to work on the audio before it goes in the final rendered version of the video, and I will normalize the audio and I will compress the audio, possibly. And I do use a noise limiter as well. Now, I could save myself a great deal of time by just putting all this into OBS and have it all happen while you're actually recording. Say if I was live streaming, you'd probably want to do that, but again, I do it all in the editing software, trying to keep the amount of processing necessary to record while playing a game as low as possible. So I do it all afterwards in the editing software and only put on a noise gate for my voice. But yeah, you might, to save yourself some time overall in producing high quality videos, you might want to add a lot more filters. And something you'd want to look into separately, but I would start with, at the very least, use a noise gate like I am now for your mic audio. Otherwise, when you go to edit the video afterwards, you're probably gonna have to cut out all the sections between where you're talking by hand, and that can take a lot of time. Anyway, that's just about everything as far as I can think of. Like I say, I'm absolutely no expert here, so if anyone's got any further information, please feel free to leave comments and let us know. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. I'll leave links in the description when I've got the next video, which will be a video on actually how to do the editing. And yeah, so hopefully I'll see you in that. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, hopefully I'll see you next time. Take it easy.